Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Well, I'd say welcome back to our garden, but as you can see, I am not in the garden. And that's because our weather is going to be crazy this week. I had fully intended to shoot a video on planting and growing broccoli, and I was totally ready for it. And then I looked at the forecast for this week, which includes rain, high winds, snow, temperatures under freezing, and I was like, okay, that's not a very nice way to start off my poor broccoli plants. So what I ended up doing is I posted a question on my Instagram and Facebook accounts saying, okay, change your plans. I want to ask what your gardening questions are. And I picked 10 of them that I felt would be of the most interest to all of you. So that's what I'm going to do today. If I don't answer the question that you posted on social media, I promise that I will get back to you with an answer. So hang tight on that. But I've got 10 questions here, and I'm going to answer each of them. And I'm hoping that you'll find this interesting and fun. And I think it would be fun to do this again, maybe in another month or so. Okay, so the first question has to do with our hoop house. Teresa asked, when and what do you plant in your hoop house for summer and winter? We initially built our hoop house in 2014 for the sole purpose of growing cold-tolerant vegetables during the fall and winter months. It is 10 feet wide by 9 feet long and covers 2 of our raised beds. But it didn't take us long to realize that certain warm season crops would love that extra warmth during the spring and summer months, so it's in use year-round. The types of veggies that we grow during the colder months include spinach, lettuce, kale, and pak choi. I start most of those indoors first so I can plant them as soon as our summer veggies are finished for the season. We plant warm season crops such as tomatoes, peppers, and melons in the hoop house once the daytime lows stop going below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. The time frame for putting in the cold-tolerant veggies in the fall is around the 1st of October. Karen says, I make my own compost and add it to my beds every year, and that's awesome. This year I planted tomato seedlings, and within hours they were covered with pillbugs. What is the solution? Oh, that is so frustrating, and I've had that happen too. The interesting thing you need to know about pillbugs and sowbugs is that they are also considered beneficial insects. I know that's hard to believe, but it's because they help break down organic matter in our soil, and that's a good thing. But the evil side of them is that they love to chew on just tiny little seedlings, and of course it usually kills them and then it sets you back. So it is really frustrating. The first thing I would recommend doing is to remove any kind of extra garden debris from the bed that you have little seedlings in, because for one thing, it will attract the pillbugs and sowbugs. It provides them with a place to hide as well, and you don't want that. You might consider sprinkling some diatomaceous earth around the base of the seedlings, because that provides a barrier for the plants that keeps the pillbugs away. You can find diatomaceous earth at garden centers and online. You can also use products that contain spinosad, which is a beneficial bacteria, also pretty easy to find in garden centers and online. It's a good idea to water your garden first thing in the morning so that everything dries out by the time the evening rolls around. And if the pillbugs and sowbugs are a big problem, you might consider purchasing some beneficial nematodes. Those are microscopic roundworms, and they target different types of creatures that are in the soil. And since pillbugs and sowbugs typically lay eggs in the soil and they're real active in the soil, that might be a possibility. Hang in there. Ruth wants to know if there are any real solutions to prevent and/or control powdery mildew on squash. And yes, there are. The first thing you need to know is that powdery mildew is a fungus. And it got that name because it looks like somebody sprinkled baby powder or flour onto the leaves of the plants. It's very common to see this on squash leaves, usually near the end of the growing season. Now, it does happen more frequently on plants that are not in full sun. So make sure that when you plant your seeds or seedlings, you put them in the sunniest place that you've got. You might be able to locate a variety of squash that's resistant to powdery mildew, so that's an option. It's important to space your plants appropriately because when they're crowded together, that makes it easier for the powdery mildew to spread. I like to space my squash plants about 3 feet apart. That gives them plenty of room, and I usually don't have problems with the powdery mildew. Another thing is that you don't want to fertilize your plants a lot because what happens is that promotes lush new growth, and unfortunately that is more susceptible to powdery mildew. You also want to water your plants in the morning so that all of the foliage has plenty of time to dry off before nighttime arrives. One thing that's super important is to not put the infected plant material into your compost pile because that will perpetuate the problem in your garden. Much as I hate to say it, put that plant material into your trash, not the compost pile. And then one last thought is there are some organic fungicides and plant extracts that are supposed to be good at preventing and controlling powdery mildew, and they're pretty easy to find at your local garden center. Marcia or Marcia wants to know which seeds I'm direct sowing in the garden this year rather than starting them indoors. I like to direct sow arugula, basil, chard, beets, carrots, parsnips, radishes, and turnips. Now those last 5 crops are all root crops, and they really need to be sown directly in the garden because they don't like their roots to be disturbed. Janet asks, how do you know when it's time to pot up seedlings? That's a good question for this time of year. What you want to do is look at the bottom of the seed starting tray. If you see a few roots coming out of the bottom, then it's time to move them to individual pots. I typically use 3 to 4 inch plastic pots for this. And if it's going to be quite a while before the plants will be going out to the garden, keep an eye on the bottoms of those pots because you might need to up-pot them to another large pot again. Erin asks, how do you know when you can move tomato and pepper seedlings from indoors under lights to the greenhouse? Well, it all depends on when your greenhouse is warm enough for them because they do not like to be cold. About the 3rd or 4th week in April, we run a long extension cord out to our little greenhouse and connect it to a small space heater along with a thermostat. When the temperature goes below about 45 degrees Fahrenheit, it turns on the heater automatically. Once we're sure this is working, we move our tomato and pepper seedlings along with other seedlings out there. This has worked really well for us. Philip wants to know, is it really not worth starting pumpkins, squash, cucumbers, etc. indoors as opposed to direct sowing? Seems to be the consensus from what I've seen. And you know, it really depends upon your circumstances and your preferences. I like to start mine indoors ahead of time, usually by about 2 weeks, for some practical reasons. I want to space the seedlings appropriately so I don't have to wonder if a seed is going to germinate in the garden. We have a lot of quail in our garden that love to nibble on freshly sprouted seeds. So if I can start the seeds indoors ahead of time, the seedlings won't be so appealing to the birds. But it's really up to you. Carrie says her garlic is growing great so far. And she wants to know if she can grow garlic again in the same bed this fall. Well, Carrie, if your garden is large enough to allow you to rotate your crops, that would be the preference because that greatly reduces or eliminates the problems with diseases or insects. But if you don't have the room, what you would want to do is replenish the nutrients in the soil by adding in some organic compost and some bone meal, and then go ahead and plant your next garlic crop in the same bed this fall. NC Mothership on Instagram asked a really interesting question. She says, what has been the most surprising thing you have grown, and what can't you grow that you wish you could? The most surprising thing is artichokes because the plants don't typically produce artichokes that you can harvest until the second year, and our winters are just too cold for them to make it. They do grow as perennials in hardiness zones 7 to 11, but we're in 6B. However, I learned about a seed starting method called vernalization quite a few years ago. It's a way of exposing the seeds to cold temperatures in order to make the plants think they've already gone through the winter. I know that sounds crazy. And that makes them produce artichokes in the first year. It's really cool. And if you're interested, I have information on my website about this, and I'll put a link to it in the video description. What can't I grow? Well, there's actually 2 crops that I've tried and just haven't had good success with. One is cauliflower and the other is watermelons. I planted cauliflower last year and it didn't grow well. It bolted to seed. It just didn't want to produce for me. I've planted watermelons a few different times, but I don't think they like our weather. Now for my last question, Joe asked, what's the one vegetable that you just cannot believe people do not grow more of based on how so incredibly easy it is to get it to produce for you and how it tastes way better than store-bought? That's a tricky question, Joe, because you might think it would be tomatoes because store-bought tomatoes are pathetic. Nothing tastes as good as a homegrown tomato. But based on your criteria for the question, people grow it a lot, and sometimes they have problems, sometimes they don't. It's not necessarily super easy to grow great tomatoes. So I had to really think about this one. I think I would have to say cantaloupes. If you've never tasted a fully ripened melon, and the ones in grocery stores are harvested well before they've ripened, you owe it to yourself to try some. So my quick tips for that would be to start them indoors about 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time, plant them in a very sunny location, and be sure to water them regularly. My favorite variety is Tuscan Napoli from Renee's garden, and my mouth is watering just thinking about them. Well, that's a wrap for this week, and I hope you enjoy this format for a change of pace. Next week, I will be outside planting broccoli, and I've got all kinds of tips to share with you because I grow broccoli that is huge and no insect problems whatsoever. So stay tuned for that. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening.